Good afternoon. It's good to see so many familiar faces in the room. I've kept in touch with what happened this morning through Twitter. People like Max from Police Review. Wesley, is he still here from PA? Okay. And other colleagues in the room. And I understand there were a few comments made this morning and cheap remarks with it as well. And from someone we would consider a colleague in the service, to make those remarks really is cheap and undermines that individual as a person and the role he has. So I know there's an awful lot of anger amongst my colleagues for what that individual said, and I think you made your feelings known at the time, but I just feel it needs to be said from here as well.
I did apologise, not on his behalf, but I did apologise.
I understand. Okay, well, I've been asked to speak today about policing in these tough economic times. Well, I can assure you that for the 140,000 police officers in England and Wales, it seems less about policing in tough economic times and more about the government being tough on policing in these economic times. But credit where credit is due. The government appear determined to reduce paper bureaucracy, and they have acted quickly to reduce recording requirements for stop and account, a subject I've been involved in for about 10 years, and I welcome that. We also welcome the changes to discretion, local accountability, custody sergeants charging decisions. They're all practical and they're pragmatic changes. However, in the space of 6 weeks, we have had two major reports which will drastically impact upon policing and the service we are able to provide to the public. The first is NARUD review of policing leadership and training. The second is the Windsor review of police remunerations and conditions of service. But when you look closely at the content of these reports, neither of them have addressed the fundamental questions that remain unanswered. Those questions are, who are the police and what is their role? The NARUD review appears to be more about finding a new purpose and function for the Association of Chief Police Officers than it is about seeking to make improvements for the police service and the public. And whilst the Windsor review of pay and conditions has fallen into the trap of seeking to reform the police through cuts in pay. That's not reform, that is cost-cutting. In fact, cost-cutting to the tune of £500 million, and at what a cost. A demoralised, an undervalued and a victimised police service. That is the true cost of Windsor's recommendations that the Home Secretary is now seeking to push through the Police Negotiating Board as quickly as possible. A series of recommendations that will cause financial hardship for police officers and see a further decline in officers' work-life balance. Sadly, Windsor has failed to recognise that unlike other workers, there is a lack of personal choice of police officers who must obey lawful orders, including being directed by senior officers to do what duty they perform, when they perform it, and where they perform it. So what do we need to do? Is policing really so complex that it requires report after report, review after review, and reform after reform? I don't think it does. But what we do need is to get back to basics. Policing can and should be straightforward. The principles of policing set out by the founding father of policing, Sir Robert Peel, are still as relevant today as they were in the 1800s. He stated, the efficiency of the police should be measured by the absence of crime. We should police with consent, and that the police are the public and the public are the police. And when you look at these basic principles, has anything really changed? I accept that society is far more complex and demanding, and that those tasked with exerting authority are now more accountable than ever. Yet, despite our denigration by this government and some of the media, we have never been more efficient. You just don't have to take my word for it. The facts speak for themselves. If you look back to the crime levels we faced in the mid-1990s, we have reduced crime by half. But the government seeks to treat policing as a business, where if there's ever a case for maintaining the record number of police officers and staff we have and rewarding them fairly, then surely a 50% reduction in crime is it. Instead, as comments by the opposition this week suggest, we are likely to see a reduction of 30,000 police officers and staff. On the issue of consent, we also do policing by consent. In the last 20 years, the police service has taken huge strides to ensure that all communities are represented in the service and to improve relations and understanding of the different communities we serve. And the police, being a visible part of the community, ensure that the police are the public and the public are the police. This government has a whole host of mantras and sound bites when it comes to policing. They talk about the police being crime fighters and not form fillers. They talk about the police, they say the police have just one target, and that's to fight crime. And in the words of the Home Secretary, to fight crime no more and no less. And they say that the main focus is to protect the front line. They went as far as to set out their stall for police reform with this as their main aim and objectives. Yet, if they could not and still cannot define what they mean by front line. In fact, it seems the whole of the public sector reform strategy is based on this mythical front line, whether it's nursing, policing, teaching, prisons, probation or firefighting. They have based their plans on protecting what they naively thought was a small and insignificant front line. The reality is the front line is a lot more bigger and plays a pivotal role in delivering public services. We're all aware of the HMIC report published only a few weeks ago that showed 2/3 of police officers and staff are engaged in some form of frontline activity. The same report also showed that they were supported by the remaining 1/3 of police officers and staff. So the HMIC view is clear. Everyone has an important role to play to ensure that policing is delivered effectively. If the government are intent on reducing the headcount, then perhaps they should have conducted a thorough review of the police and criminal justice system beforehand. Instead, they have got their ducks out of order, and if you excuse the analogy overload, they've put the cart before the horse. In the last 10 years, we've had 2 moral panics. You will remember the Street Crime Initiative dealing with robbery of mobile phones by teenagers, and a focus again on the guns, knives and gang culture. We've also witnessed the rise of British homegrown Islamic terrorists. But why? Why was none of this predicted? Why was the rise of groups such as the EDL inevitable and therefore predictable? And who is predicting these panics now? What will be the next moral panics we will face? Who will predict them? It certainly will not be the MPIA. Does the government, indeed, does anyone know what we may be facing in 5 or 10 years' time? For example, what will the economy be like? How many people will be out of work? What global conflicts will this country be involved in? And will those tensions be played out on our streets too? Just ask yourself, what form of public protest will take in the future? How will technology be used by criminals and gangs, and what part will the internet and social networks play? In fact, what will the latest technology actually be? And most importantly, how many young men will there be in our society? And why do I ask? It's because it's from this group of young men who make up the biggest group of victims, but likewise make up the biggest group of offenders. So if we don't know this number, how can we properly allocate and plan resources in time? The government has slashed the police budget by 20% without any of these considerations, not one of them. The only consideration they have made is to save money quickly, but in reality they are causing a lot of pain for little gain. And let's not forget that the first duty of government is the protection of its citizens. How can we continue doing the same old thing, the same old processes, and expect things to change? We will certainly stumble upon the next moral panic and then use and divert valuable resources to deal with them. That's no way to effectively plan. That's actually taken us back to the fire brigade policing that we did in the 70s and 80s, when all we did was turn up, deal with the immediate situation and move on. There was no learning process and there was no planning ahead. It's a waste of resources, it's bureaucratic and it's largely inefficient. But I'm not here to talk about problems. I'm actually here to offer what the Police Federation wants to be part of, the solution, and what we can do about this. If we're going to have such wide-scale but piecemeal reform of policing, then let's do it properly. Let's review our role in this complex society. Let's ask the public. Let's ask the public what works and what doesn't. Let's find out what their wants are, their needs, and what they want from the police service. Let's ask them what they expect from the criminal justice system. And most importantly, let's ensure that we have the ability to identify and plan for future threats and challenges. Let's ensure we are able to effectively allocate resources in time. And we agree with the Police Minister that resources are precious, and that this is the only way to ensure efficient and effective use of resources and reduce bureaucracy accordingly. The piecemeal and the haphazard approach to reform has failed. It's failed time and time again, and we need a coordinated and thorough independent review. And perhaps by someone with knowledge of policing, rather than an ex-rail regulator who fails to listen. Now, I've no disrespect to trade enthusiasts amongst you, but the state of our railways is not a great advertisement for what we would want for the future of policing. If you leave here with one overriding thought today, then it is this. Despite what you may read in the newspapers, and despite what you may have heard from the government ministers and certain think tanks, police officers are not resistant to change. The Police Federation of England and Wales is not resistant to change. In fact, we've been calling for considered change for over a decade now. We have championed neighbourhood policing, we've championed localism, and we've highlighted the absurdities of the target culture. We facilitate change, not resist it. But change that must have the public interest at its heart. Not change for change's sake, or simply to save money, or change is based on a whim by those merely seeking re-election. Ladies and gentlemen, what we urgently need is a Royal Commission on Policing. It's the only way that we can ensure we have a police service that is fit for purpose. A police service that delivers what the public want, and a police service that takes account of the huge changes that we have seen in society. Our police service is the envy of the world. I can assure you that we are not going to roll over and let this government destroy it and jeopardise public safety without a fight. Thank you.